I mean, it's interesting that Charles Darwin himself said to this day, the eye makes me shudder. I mean, do you honestly believe the eye evolved? I mean, think about it, folks. Your eyeball allows light to pass through the cornea into the self-adjusting aperture called the pupil. It is focused by the lens and the vitreous on the retina. The retina contains photoreceptors called rods and cones. There are 60 million cones for bright light and color, 125 million rods for peripheral and night vision. These light-sensitive rods and cones cause photochemical reactions that transform the light into electrical impulses. Some 1,000 million of these impulses are somehow transmitted every second to the human brain. Let me say that again. Some 1,000 million of these impulses are somehow transmitted every second to the human brain that translates and turns them into images and takes appropriate action. You honestly believe that this is a product of random impersonal chance? This is why people like Dr. Michael Behe, professor of biochemistry at Lehigh University today, has written a book called Darwin's Black Box. If you haven't read it, you really should. In Darwin's Black Box, he talks about what he calls irreducibly complex systems. An irreducibly complex system is a system that must be fully functional, wherein the removal of any one of these parts causes the system to be functionally useless. An example he gives is that of a mousetrap. A simple mousetrap has 5 parts: a platform, a spring, a hammer, a holding bar, and a catch. You know, the removal of any one of these parts makes it functionally useless. I mean, you can have a platform and a hammer and a holding bar and a catch, but what good is it if you don't have a spring? You can have a spring, a hammer, a holding bar, and a catch. What good is it if you don't have a platform? Understand, it has to be fully functional or it is functionally useless. And natural selection and survival of the fittest would have simply wiped it away. And you're going to tell me that your eye, the complexity of it, with 125 million rods, 60 million cones, 1,000 million impulses being translated every second into images in your brain. Understand that has to be fully functional, the eyeball, or it'd be functionally useless, and evolution would have just discarded it. This is why a person like Dr. Ernest Chan, who won the Nobel Prize for his research in the curative properties of penicillin, wrote in Life magazine, he said, quote, "To postulate that the development and survival of the fittest is entirely a consequence of chance mutations seems to me a hypothesis based on no evidence and irreconcilable with the facts. These classical evolutionary theories are a gross oversimplification of an immensely complex and intricate mass of facts. It amazes me that they are swallowed so uncritically and readily and for such a long time by so many scientists without a murmur of protest." Albert Einstein, who was a theist, a believer in God, Einstein said, "I've come to realize that the universe is not a product of chance." But he said it is held together by formulated mathematical laws and principles. And Einstein said only an intelligence could hold it together. But he said, where does intelligence reside but in a person? Even though in this case it may be a supernatural person whom we call God. You see, the real question today in America, is there a God, and has that God communicated to us? I was speaking in Cuba a couple of months ago, and I've had the privilege of being in Cuba on 3 occasions. We were holding pastors' conferences a few months ago for 1,000 Cuban pastors in Santiago and Bayamo and Gamacoy and Havana, Cuba. And we need to be praying for our Cuban brothers and sisters. I mean, Fidel has just destroyed the country, and every Cuban gets paid the same amount by the government. It doesn't matter whether you're a teacher, a plumber, electrician, a pastor. Everybody in Cuba today gets $8 a month. That's what they live on. Most Cubans today are down to rice and beans once a day. That's what they're surviving on. The poverty in Cuba is overwhelming. I mean, communism has just destroyed the country. And in spite of that, the Church of Jesus Christ has grown like wildfire throughout Cuba. And we need to be praying for our Cuban brothers and sisters. But I was sharing with the people down in Cuba. This is a picture in Havana. It's like a classic car show. All the cars are from before 1959. And but I was sharing with the Cuban pastors I was preaching to and talking with for a week down there. Telling one of my favorite stories about a father and son who were walking down a dirt path one day. And they came upon an anthill that somebody had stepped on and smashed those ants. I don't know, do you have ants here in Washington? And the little boy who was 4 years old with his daddy, he looked up to his daddy. He said, "Daddy, wouldn't it be good if we could go down and tell those ants we love them? You know, tell those ants we care about them and help them with their sick and their wounded." And the father, he put his arm around his little boy. He said, son, the only way we could tell those ants that we love them, that we care about them, is to become an ant. To live like an ant and talk like an ant, and by our lives they would know what we are like. See, 2,000 years ago, God looked down on a world that he created, a world that he loved. And God said, I want to tell you how much I love you. How is God going to do that? And God said, I will become a man, and I will live like a man and talk like a man, and by my life, you will know what I'm like. 2,000 years ago, God broke into human history. He split history into BC and AD, and he personally revealed himself to us. You know, people often ask, how could God reveal himself to us? The Bible says God is spirit. You know, right now, bouncing around this room, Fox News, CNN, MSNBC, ESPN, the football draft is going on right now, all over this room. It's filling this room. You can't see it, you can't hear it. But you know, if I had a little box here called a television set, and I turned that box on, all those invisible waves that you cannot see, you cannot hear, they would come into that box and you would see a picture, you would hear sound. The invisible would become visible. Colossians 1:15 says that Jesus Christ is the visible expression of the invisible God. Please understand, Jesus Christ, folks, is the television set of God. If you have ever wanted to know what God is like, people say, what's God like? If you want to know what God is like, look at Jesus Christ. The Bible says he is the visible expression of the invisible God. He came to personally reveal to us who God is and what he was like.